Am I here? Can you hear me? Hi. This is Sanem speaking, and I am in Izmir today. I hope you can hear me and see me, and that my voice is reaching to you all right, because I'm gonna cover some important subjects today. Where is Roumeli? This is the question that we will be dealing with today. By the way, I am in some sort of Roumeli. I'm in a place which was at some point called Roumeli. Like it was the land of the room. The land of the room is not a location, it is a concept, and it is one that is moving. And I will try to explain to you this today, like how Roumeli has been moving since 1,000 years or so, and where we are today in the journey that is Roumeli. Hello Daniela, welcome. Good to see you here. So today I put on this top which looks like those mesh shields that were worn by medieval warriors because it suits with the subject. Today we are talking about a concept that started in the times that people call medieval times. For my listeners who are not from our region, because whoever is Turkish or Greek or Balkanian to some extent, they will have an idea about what Roumeli is. So Roumeli basically is a word, it's a Turkish word that designates a geographical location. The word Roumeli has been used to designate the Balkans. Today it is the name of an administrative region in Greece. But historically, Roumeli has been the name of quite different places. Actually, the word appears with the Turks appearing in this side of the world. El means hand, but it also means land. So when Turks were coming to this part of the world from Central Asia, they appeared here as warriors. They were mercenaries. They were basically paid soldiers. You could rent them, like whoever wanted to work with them could rent them. It was not like they had any, they were not moving based on, values or principle. Not that any soldiers or warriors are moving on the basis of principles or values or whatever, but contrary to what we believe today, the Turks at the time did not represent anything other than themselves. They were just warriors, mercenaries, strong warriors that you could rent for your wars. We are talking roughly about the years 800, 900 after Christ, 800, 900 BC. By this time already, Rome was kind of divided. There were differences in creed and in tradition between Eastern Rome and Western Rome. But the schism had not yet been crystallized. There were a few other states here and there to the south of the Roman Empire, in Mesopotamia, in the land that we call Persia, in the Caucasus. And these little empires were all fighting against each other, and they all needed the Turks as mercenaries because they were good warriors and they were completely aloof from the conflicts that already existed in the region. But it's dangerous to work with mercenaries because there comes a time when they become the power, when they are supposed to fight in the name of power. So that's what happened with the Turks. from being mercenaries, from fighting for the sedentary empires, the sedentary peoples that were already located in the region, they slowly started gathering power for themselves. We would hear afterwards that the Turks already had an idea called the Red Apple, because they were a people that are moving, and they were actually not even one people. These people had diversity within their own groups. So it was not like they were not a nation that moved together, that did everything together, and that had to keep to certain boundaries. No, it was a diversity. A few groups that shared some traditions, some moral norms and values. But beyond that, they were pretty lax, and they did whatever they wanted. They went to wherever they wanted, but they always moved. And they always moved westwards from 500 BC onwards. Actually, some parts of the Turks, they remained in China, and some went eastwards, but we don't know about them, and it's not their history that we are talking about today, because it's the Turks who moved westwards that gave us the name Roumeli. Rum is supposed to mean Roman, and Rome is supposed to be the name of the city, but actually no. Rome is something much bigger than Rome. Rome is the name of the empire, but also the city of Istanbul, Constantinople, had taken the name New Rome by that time, and they had a claim of being Rome, of being the real, true Rome, both in terms of statehood and in terms of religion. Therefore, the Byzantine Empire did not exist. There was no such thing as the Byzantine Empire. It was, maybe you could call it Eastern Rome, but it certainly did not occur to anyone that they would not be called Rome. So, all of these places, all the region that today is Turkey, that we today call Turkey, and also Mesopotamia, the Caucasus, before they even reached the Balkans, coming eastwards all the way from China and Iran, Turks saw these lands, they met these lands, and they were like, cool, these are the lands of the Romans, because it's all Romans living here. They call themselves Romans. They say that they are Rome, they say that they're the Roman Empire. So, just like they themselves call themselves Romans, we will also call them Romans. What else can we call them anyway? It's not like we have other information for them. So since 1,000 years, Turkish speakers have called their lands the Roman lands, because for them, they knew very well in their heads that before them other people existed in the lands that they now inhabited. They were not only okay with it, they also wanted it, because they were okay to live in diversity, and in any case they made a living as mercenaries, which already assumed the existence of another people, of another state in the regions that they inhabited. So they just called everything Roumeli, the land of the Romans. And yet they were always constantly going to Roumeli. A song from the Balkans, and by the way, today, when we say Roumeli in Turkey, we mean the Balkans. So, a Roumeli song, a Balkan song, which I found very funny when I thought about it, talks about going to Roumeli. Because obviously, Roumeli is not a place where you can settle in. It's a destination. It's not a location. çıkayım gideyim Urumeli'ne. In this Balkanic folk song, a girl talks about going to Roumeli. I don't know what she means exactly when she says to go to Roumeli. I don't know about the location, but the meaning is clear. Roumeli is the seat of the governor. She wants to go to Roumeli, where the seat of the governor is, because she wants to give arzuhal, υπεύθυνη δήλωση, a declaration of demand, of interest, to marry her lover, who is called Mehmet. She has been secretly in love with Mehmet since a long time, and recently their secret love affair has become public and she's not happy with it. She wants to marry this boy, Mehmet, and she will sacrifice a few animals the night that she manages to sleep together with him. Çıkayım gideyim Urumeli'ne, aman aman. Arzu hal vereyim Mehmet'im beyler beyine, aman aman. Beyler beyine arzu hal vereyim Mehmet'im beyler beyine, aman aman beyler beyine. Kimleri sarayım yar senin yerine, aman aman. Bize bu ayrılık Mehmet'im pek yaman oldu, aman aman pek yaman oldu. Gizli gizli sevdalarımız aşikar oldu, aman aman aşikar oldu. Çıkayım gideyim bir uçtan uca, aman aman. Göstereyim sana Mehmet'im ayrılık nice, aman aman ayrılık nice. Göstereyim sana Mehmet'im ayrılık nice, aman aman ayrılık gizli sevdalarımız aşikar oldu, aman aman aşikar oldu. The girl wants to go to Roumeli because that's where the seat of the governor is. Just like most of the folk songs that have remained to our day, this folk song is from the Ottoman times. Therefore, the girl here is talking about the Ottoman administrative system. The Ottoman lands were divided into two. There was Anadolu and there was Roumeli. And these two lands had two governors because they were geographically separate. They were separated by the Black Sea, Aegean, and the Straits. So it made sense to call one of them Anadolu. Anatoli, the word Anadolu comes from Greek Anatoli, it means east. And Roumeli, as I said, is a Turkish word that means the Roman land. So, by the time of the Ottomans, Roumeli had become the name of the Balkans, but it was not so before. The first Roumeli we meet as the name of a geographical region or location is somewhere way to the east of the Balkans. It is actually today on the eastern edge of Turkey. It's a city called Erzurum. Erzurum also means the land of the Romans. Differently than Roumeli, it's a Persian combination. Ars is a Persian word, or Arabic, I'm not sure, but definitely it exists in Persian as well. And Erzurum is the land of the Romans. So Turks first met the Romans to the very east of the lands that we today think as Roman lands. The Romans were a big entity, they had a lot of lands, and all of the region that today is Turkey was part of the Ottoman lands, including Erzurum. Erzurum, if you look at the map, you will find Caucasus. There is the Black Sea. To the east of the Black Sea, there is the Caucasus Mountains, the Caucasus region. And the southern edge of the Caucasus region, where the mountains end and the large plain starts, there is this city there, which always used to be an important city. It always used to be a trade center. Back then, in Roman times, it was called Theodosioupoli, the city of Theodosius. But when Turks reached there, for them it was the land of the Romans. And so they called it Erzurum. At the time, as I said, Turks were mercenaries for quite different political entities. They were also mercenaries for the Persians. And they found the Persians quite elevated in terms of culture. Speaking of the Romans, you would think that their epitome of culture was Rome, but they did not think so, because, mind you, Rome at the time was quite a degenerate and corrupt entity already. They had a very hard time holding the lands that they nominally dominated, whereas Persians seemed to offer a better statehood. And I only imagine that this was what mattered for the Turks, because for them, until very recently, high culture meant Persian culture. Good language meant Persian language, and whatever they looked up to, it had to do with Iran and with the Iranians, the Persians. So the land of the Rum was called Erzurum in Persian, because as they were mercenaries for the Persians, the Turks also were moving further beyond the Persian lands, and they were going and settling and populating these different regions that all belonged to the Romans, and they were all Roman regions. You might have heard of Mevlana Celaleddin Rumi, for instance, Mevlana, the great Rumi. His name also comes from the same root, Rum. Now, why is that? Rumi actually is, I'm not sure about his ethnicity. Some say he was Persian, some say he was Turkish. He definitely did not write in Turkish, because at the time Turkish was not a high language. Like, you wouldn't write in Turkish if you wanted serious people to read you, or if you wanted anyone to read you, because, Turks were not, they were warriors, and the Persians were the people of the pen. The main difference at the time in political thinking were between the men of the sword and the men of the pen. So Turks here in this equation were the men of the sword, and Persians were the men of the pen, and Romans were the people who inhabited the land to the north of the Persians. So Turks, as the men of the sword, as they spread into the areas of the Romans, they started calling themselves Romans, because now it was them who were populating the Roman lands. A Romanness, after all, was an identity that went with locality, or it was such in their minds, or it was such that this difference kept on existing for them, because as they kept moving westwards, other tribes also kept moving westwards. So by the time of Mevlana Celaleddin Rumi, the Mongolians already were coming from the east, and this made Mevlana a Rumi in their eyes and in his own eyes, because definitely he was not Mongolian. I don't think he had a very low opinion of the Mongolians, except for that they were a bit too prone to violence, I believe. And by the time of the Mongolian invasions, parts of the Turkish population had already become sedentary, or they were sedentary curious. They wanted to settle and possibly start doing agriculture. They had not all of them started to do this, but there already had come into being this mixed population in parts of Anatolia, the region that we today call Turkey, where people spoke different languages, they shared different religious traditions, but they all called themselves Rumi, Romans. For them, being Roman did not necessarily mean a religious identity either. But actually, for the Roman Empire themselves, and especially for the Eastern Church, sticking to the name Roman had to do with a religious identity. We know by now that it was the Christian tradition, and it was the Orthodox Church to a great extent, that rejected the name Greek or Hellen while talking about the population that we today call Greeks. And differently than Western Romans, these people were speaking a language that was not Latinic. They were speaking the language that we today call Greek. The church liturgy, the religious liturgy, happened in the language that we today call Greek. But the people, because of their religious identity, they rejected the name Greek because for them, in their minds, the name Greek was linked to paganism. It was linked to paganistic traditions, pre-Christian, pantheistic, polytheistic traditions, and they did not want to be associated with such barbarities. That's why they insisted on calling themselves the Romans and on not appropriating any other name for their own identity. So they called themselves the Romans. The Turkic mixed populations that started inhabiting these lands started to call themselves Romans as well, because why not? You know, they were different than what they used to be a few generations ago. They were Rumi now. They were not Easterns, they were surely not Farsi. Turkish also was not an identity that people wanted to appropriate at the time because, you know, wherever you go, everywhere and at all times of history, sedentary people have always had a low opinion of nomadic peoples. And therefore the Turks or Turkish origin people who were settling down in different regions, they did not call themselves Turks anymore. They were sometimes called Turks by others. For instance, the Ottomans had the habit of calling Turks the rebellious populations that lived here and there, or afterwards the agricultural populations that lived here and there, and they actually called them Etrak bi idrak. Turks who do not have intelligence, Turks who do not have the capacity to grasp anything. So, just like Greek, Turk was not a word that they wanted to appropriate and to use for themselves. It was used, the word Turk, as well as the word Greek. These words were used by the Europeans, or the Franks, as they called these people. It was the Franks that called them Turkish or Greek. They themselves called themselves Romans, Mohammedans, Christians maybe, but they all called themselves Romans. Definitely, they were Romans. So the first geographical location that got pinned down with the name Roman land was actually Erzurum. And Erzurum is today not only in the very east of Turkey, but it is also a very highly conservative and it's a very conservative place, and it's a place where there are lots of religious sensitivities, you know. Until recently, whenever it was the month of Ramadan, you would hear somebody being beaten up in Erzurum for eating during the fasting hours or drinking during the fasting hours. My mom was born in Erzurum. They are from a city to the east of Erzurum, a city called Kars, but since Kars was a very small place, they had to migrate to Erzurum in the early 1960s to have some economic possibilities. You know, my grandfather, who died last year, and I'm actually in his room right now. He used to sleep in this room in the last years of his life. You know, he wanted to make money and make a living for his family, and Kars did not offer anything, so they went to Erzurum. But the difficult thing, what for them difficult was at the time, was that as people of Kars, they were slightly more left-wing than the people of Erzurum. And I was narrated years later that my grandfather and my uncles had like they were actually receiving aggression and even violence at times because they did not follow these superficial rules of, you know, what it means to be a daily Muslim. And then they left and came to Izmir in the 1980s. But anyway, I digress because this is not about us, but this is an example that shows to what extent Erzurum has become an Islamic city today. And yet it is called the land of the Rooms, because it was the land of the Rooms. Erzurum has many super nice songs. Today I'm gonna sing not one of those super nice songs. This is also a nice song, but you know, not the kind that you dream of when you talk about Erzurum music. And yet, it is a song that demonstrates the current perception about Erzurum. It is a song that says, Erzurum kilidi mülki İslam'ın. Erzurum is the key to the land of Islam. God, Mevla, takes care of Erzurum. Erzurum is the protector of the people of Islam. And God is the protector of Erzurum. In its lakes there are waters, and we hope that there will be. The day always carries troubles, but God protects Erzurum. Erzurum kilidi mülk-i selamın, Mevla'ya emanet olsun Erzurum, olsun Erzurum. Erzurum derbendi ehli İslam'ın, Mevla'ya emanet olsun Erzurum, olsun Erzurum. Actually thinking about the geographical naming politics of the Turkish state, I find it kind of, I used to find it interesting that the name Erzurum has been allowed to exist. Because the nation making of Turkey in the modern nation state, it was accompanied by a lot of forceful changing of geographical names. Like, it is a very insistent practice in Turkey. Whatever name is slightly reminiscent of the once upon a time existence of Armenians or Greeks or whatever, they are erased in a policy. It's the policy is not just about deleting the names, it's also about deleting the spaces themselves most of the time. So when I realized that Erzurum means Roman land, and probably it is revealing that I had to notice that Erzurum means Roman land. It wasn't evident. First, I was surprised that it wasn't immediately changed, but then I was like, they didn't have to change this, because this name is actually, first of all, it's flattering, and second of all, Rum did not necessarily mean non-Turkish or non-Christian at any time in history. In 1821, during the times of Mahmud II, he was a reformer who tried to bring the Ottoman Empire in line with European modernity, and he introduced many European habits and customs, such as the calendar. Until the times of Mahmud II, Ottomans used the Hijri calendar, the Islamic calendar, but there is a slight problem with the Islamic calendar, which we still see today, and it's that the Islamic calendar goes with the moon, which makes sense because the land in which Islam was revealed for the first time, you cannot talk about seasons other than, there are no seasons because it's very close to the Ecuador. It's always the same season almost. The daytime does not change. Every month is the same. So the only way they can follow the passing of time is through following the moon. So they have the lunar calendar. But in our part of the world, which is further north, and it would be the same in further south, the lunar calendar is really hard to follow because we have seasons, and the seasons are very dominant in defining the year. Therefore, and especially when it was time, until they started doing business with the Europeans, the Ottomans did not really care about the passing of time. It was a pre-modern culture, so it did not really matter for them if it was the year 27 or 1027 or whatever, because they were not going anywhere anyway. They did not need a calendar that was so strict and so definite in its namings. And in any case, the people had their own calendars. They had their own seasonal celebrations, which they did per the solar calendar as usual. But when it was time to start becoming like the Europeans, the Ottomans had to change their calendar. The starting date, the year 0, was still the year of Hijrat, of the migration of Prophet Muhammad and his followers from Mecca to Medina, but they adopted the solar system starting from the year 0 of the Hijrat, and that calendar was called the Rumi calendar. Obviously, Ottomans were the Romans of the Muslims, they were the Rumi. Steve, you said, if you say the word Roumeli to a Greek person today, he will understand that you mean the whole geographical area, roughly from Nafpaktos to Lamia informally. Exactly, I was about to talk about that. Roumeli means yet another geographical region. Today it means continental Greece, roughly, excepting the Peloponnese, like outside of the Peloponnese and the further northern regions of Greece. Mainland Greece has the name Roumeli, which actually this information gave me the idea to to do one session about the word Roumeli, because it's crazy how this word travels so swiftly, you know? Because, like, for us, Roumeli would never mean Steria Elada, you know, the mainland Greece is too far south to be Roumeli for us. In my imagination, in the Turkish imagination, Roumeli is north. So for us, Yanena would be Roumeli definitely, but Nafpaktos, no way. Like it would not occur, you know. The idea of Roumeli in the Turkish imagination is not Nafpaktos or Lamia. It's Yanena and further north. But it has stayed as an administrative name, probably because for the Ottomans, all that region was called Roumeli. And somehow, the emerging Greek state took over this name as the name of this region. Hello Yilmaz, welcome, good to see you here. Yeah, I think this is a very good example as to how words are arbitrary and names can travel anywhere they want, you know. What is Roumeli for me will be something else for someone else. Or the word Balkan, for instance. Balkan is a word for a region, that's how we know it, right? But Balkan, if you go to the parts of Thrace that is now Turkey, the Anatolian southeastern Thrace, in southeastern Thrace, if you say Balkan, it will mean mountain village or the mountainous area. I'm gonna go to the Balkan means I'm gonna go to the village or I'm going up the mountains. And I noticed recently that this usage of the word existed before the modern times as well. For the Turks living in Roumeli, therefore in the Balkans, the word Balkan meant mountain or mountain village. And going to Balkan meant going away. Which today still kind of means, you know, when you say I'm going to the Balkan or I'm gonna go to the Balkans, or XYZ Balkans, you're most of the time talking about faraway mountains. But Erzurum. Allah'a emanet olsun Erzurum is may God be the protector of Erzurum. Another tricky thing about naming here is that in this supposedly very religious song, the word Allah is not used at all, and instead they use the word Mevla. Mevla is another of the names of the divinity. You can call God God, you can call them Allah, Huda. Huda is a Persian word, but Mevla is also a Persian word. Such songs would hardly ever use the Turkish word for God, which is Tanrı or Tengri. You would, I have never heard a properly Islamic religious song using the word Tanrı or Tengri to refer to God. But they will quite commonly use the word Mevla. And actually Mevla is another Persian word which means God, and that's from where the other name of Rumi, Mevlana, comes from. And I think it's supposed to mean something like the follower of the god, or the slave of the god, or something like that. That's another evidence to the fact that for Turkish minds still, Turkishness is not Islamic enough. Anything Persian or Arabic definitely. Anything Arabic definitely is more Islamic than anything Turkish. Persian things can also pass as more Islamic. Turkishness is not Islamic enough. Just like Greekness was not considered to be Christian enough, and they had to call themselves the Romans. But Romanness was something beyond religion. And whenever actually we talk about religion, of course, religion grew Rome. It gave a boost to Rome. Definitely adopting Christianity added to the life of the political entity. I think it's not much of a speculation to say that if the Roman Emperor Constantine had not accepted Christianity, probably Rome would not last as much as it lasted. Rome lasted until 1453. And Mehmed the Conqueror, the Ottoman Sultan Mehmed, who conquered Istanbul from the Romans, he did not really think that he was ending the Roman Empire. He did think that he was conquering the Roman Empire, but he did not like to imagine it as an ending. He would rather imagine it as a continuation in a different form. He did consider himself the Kaiser of the Romans. Something that sounds very blasphemous to say in today's Turkey, but which is a historical fact, is that Sultan Mehmed the Conqueror was raised by a Christian mother. He had a Christian mother, just like many Ottoman sultans, and he was not much of a Muslim. Probably superficially, nominally he was, but he did not consider himself an emperor only for the Muslims. Muslim Turks were his dynamo, they were his engine, they were his people. But he was not very loyal to his people either, which I might talk about in another session, but not today. He considered himself the king of the Romans. He took Rome and he continued it. And I think it is safe to say today that the reason why we call Byzantine Empire the Byzantine Empire is because the name of Rome was so contested, not only in the East, but in the West as well. There was the Holy Roman Empire, for instance. The Germans wanted to have the name for themselves. They were the real Romans, the true Romans. And not only they were true, they were also holy. Then there was the Vatican, who wanted the name for themselves. Against these, the Eastern Church clung to the name of Rome. It worked, it didn't, it depends on your perspective on history. But the reason why we don't call the Byzantine Empire the Roman Empire has a lot to do with the fact that it was shamefully brought down by Muslims. But how will our perspective on the whole story change if we consider that Muslims themselves considered themselves Romans? Like, they never did not think that they were not Romans. The Turkish people settling in Western Anatolia, in Western Minor Asia, clearly, very comfortably called themselves Romans. When they wanted to talk about themselves, they used the adjective Roman, Rumi. Or for instance, there is this legendary organization of Turkish and local women called Bacıyan Rum, the Sisterhood of Rome, who was an organization that was pretty Turkish, and pretty Turkish in the sense that they had a stake in continuing Turkic traditions, nomadic traditions, where the role of the women were quite different, but yet they called themselves the Sisterhood of Rome because they were Rome. So these are the thoughts I've been having recently, like thinking about the name of Roumeli and considering that today it is like Roumeli. Erzurum is the name of a very, very conservative pro-Islamic city in the east of Turkey. Roumeli is an administrative region in Roumeli was an administrative region in the Ottomans, and today it is the name of continental Greece, like maybe 40-50% of continental Greece goes by the name of Roumeli. For contemporary Turks, it's the name of the Balkans. And for all Turks, it was the name of what they were becoming. And for the Eastern Church, it was the name of what they were. So here we have a very malleable concept. We have a concept here. The land of the Romans is a concept. It is a point where we are trying to reach. It's not a location that we inhabit. It's definitely not an identity that belongs to somebody else. It is an identity that belongs to us. It is an identity that we can take over. And if we see the things in this perspective, and if we grant the continuity that Ottomans saw in themselves from Rome towards the late Ottoman Empire, which is, a proof of their self-identity as Romans, is definite in their naming of their calendar. The Rumi are us, the Ottomans were Romans, and by extension, we also would be Romans in some way, because the idea just extends. But before we come to us, what if we were to just accept, that Ottomans were the Romans and the Romans became a Muslim empire from that point onwards? Like, how would our perspective, our perception of the whole thing changed? This is a thought experiment I would like to think. And I I think this opens some gates towards the future, especially thinking about the situation of the Middle East today. What would it mean if we accepted that the Ottomans were continuing the Roman tradition? And what if we started calling them Romans just like they called themselves? How would the whole story change? I will talk about this another time. Now is the time for one last song. This song does not have any of the relevant words of this program, but it's a song that I really like, and it happens to be from the Roumeli region, as we call it in contemporary Turkey. The Roumeli region, because it means the Balkans in today's Turkish, most songs are, they don't have this whole 4x4 rhythm. They have strange and different rhythms, which I love really. But today I was looking for a song that just goes with this 1, 2, 3, 4 rhythm, and this was one of the few that I could find, and it happens to be a song that I really love. I hope you enjoy it too. It means the red rose is red. The red rose is red, and it would be justified if I cried every day because I miss my lover. And it is really difficult to sleep without him. Kırmızı gülün hali var, aman aman. Her gün ağlasam da yeri var. Bugün benim efkarım var, aman aman. Ah, bu gönül arzu eder seni, seni yar seni. Ah, bu gönül arzu eder seni, seni yar seni. seni yar seni. Ah bu gönül arzu eder seni, seni yar seni. Yeah. The red rose is red, and this is the end of today's show. I hope I have confused you even more about where is Roumeli. It's definitely not a definite place. And life is a lot more exciting when you are constantly running after dreamlands, no? And we don't really have utopias in non-Western literature, but we definitely have destinations and directions. And Roumeli is one of them. It's a place where we go, and it's a place where we change identity and we become Rum, just like other people who claim being Rum. In a previous session, I had talked about the Rum nation as the name of the Greek nation, the nation that we today call Greek, and their trajectory within the Ottoman Empire. You can find it among my previous shows. Just saying these in case I have not told you enough about the actual rooms of the Ottoman Empire. This show was meant to be about the indefiniteness of Roumeli. I will see you next week with another interesting subject and some more songs. Thank you very much for listening to me. Take care. Have a nice week. And see you next Monday. Bye.